So we are presently in Lindome and next to the church on a little hill taking in sun. It's quite beautiful today, although the wind is coming from the west and bringing the cold of the sea. I would today talk about in age 886 about the specific and the general, the small and the big, the little distinct and the big around. I would say that the general perception is that things are different to each other, something that could also be called object, and the difference of all these turn into a sort of crowdedness, both in reality and in our mind, in the mental sphere. They take space and they demand their place, localization. There is also the thing of mutual exclusiveness, both in reality and in our mental sphere. There can be only one thing at one place. This is called localization, or the observance from the origo to the object in the glorious metaphysics of presence, or in the now. And the now is very excluding. It doesn't allow even for past or future to enter. This is how it exists, creates its radical otherness, and thereby it can come into existence and demand attention. In this process, all the things are created, or they come into existence, ontic existence, because of this movement or gesture. And after they once been established, they get attached with a history, and this history gives a sort of a birthright or a certificate for their reality. It gives them the taint of reality, the smell of reality. And in the same process, the ego or the reflective consciousness turn up as the passive onlooker on the subject that now has been established, with a history, a birth and an end, and in between that, causal relationships that all serve the purpose of making this, having the stamp or the signature of being the real McCoy or reality. But it is a circular reasoning that established the world. It does not establish itself, because it's pre-established by the ego and the idea of an outside world. So already before anything had the chance of present itself, the presencing, there is a demand that these things are there. So it's like a snapshot from a now. All these things go together to establish and lock everything into each other. Very similar to locking one of those boxes you put on the car where you have your skis. It's not until you firmly establish the lid to be in place you can begin to lock, and not until the last lock comes in place it is firmly one thing, so to speak. It won't open. In this instance, all the locks and the construction come into existence simultaneously, and that means that in some respect they can only be taken apart or dissolved simultaneously. But we can prepare the ground, so to speak, by looking into these things that we never ever looked into and start opening up a little by little. And the release you get, that will be your intention to do it more. The more openness and the ease that you will feel in thinking, doing, being present, all those things comes like boons that will show you the way that this is working. And of course a comparison can be made here also in what used to be the dogma in neurology, and that was that we perceived an outer reality, and we took that in by our eyes, our ears, our smell and so forth, and a picture became established within ourselves. That is also a locking mechanism, but I would say it's secondary. It comes after everything is already established, and of course it helps the second thing with the perception of the outside reality, whatever an outside reality could be, but it does lock it much more, even more. And I will take the opportunity here to make parallel between the outside reality and the multiple worlds of Hugh Everett or Max Tegmark. For that reason, they are all quite similar. Once we establish an outer self-sufficient coherent world, it's not any problem to take one step further and have multiple universe somewhere which we don't have any contact with either, and where we only look at them. Looking at something means that we don't know what it is. We have no contact with it whatsoever. All the objects comes into the world, and for thinking, this makes it very clear we need to take all the objects into account somehow, or at least very many, because they are all different. And here we come into the idea of an exclusiveness between different things out here in reality and a general conception, a universal or what it could be. And that seemed to be exclusive as well. You can't have the many things with all their different properties at the same time that you have a general property. And you cannot either have the whole thing put into a sort of scheme for action, because there are so many and you don't know in which order they should come and what the weight should be if you're trying to make a decision of some sort. For instance, rebuilding the house, there are so many things that demand their existence, so it blurs out how you should proceed. This is a common problem with planning. There are too many things, you don't know which ones are important, and having one thing in mind makes other things not being able to enter. I challenge this limitation really, really keenly. It is not true. It's based on some sort of pre-logic of the Gestalt. We talked about mirror reflection, that only one thing can be real. We can have all the properties of the objects in hand. We can be very specific at the very same time. This is an enormous limitation, and it's the reason for this muddy thinking that we are so plagued about these days. And it leads in the end into rumination, thinking over things more and more, adding more objects, more circumstances, more causal relationship, and in the end you don't know how to reconstruct the house or approach colleagues in the morning or whatever you are supposed to do. You take too many factors into place, you think they are excluding each other, and that there is an impossibility to have a special circumstance like building a house and the general view of the world at the same time. I felt that earlier on when typing. I went into this text I'm reading now, and I felt I was blocking out the surroundings, the back of my back, the above of my head, and this is how we usually see awareness. When we go into some small detail, we block everything else out in a strained reaction, which is cumbersome, it's full of friction, it takes a lot of effort, and it breaks the brain. It makes us use N2 instead of N1. We become overly tensed in some areas while we try to do what we think is concentration when we're blocking out the surrounding world because of unconscious gestalts that says there is a mutual exclusion between having the big picture and the small, which is very similar to the many and the one singular. You can't have them both. If you have one object, for instance the veranda in the house you're going to reconstruct, all of a sudden the attic disappears. This is exclusion. In this process we become two-dimensional because we block out what's behind us, and the tension will spread all over our body immediately. There is no time delay there. In the same moment we shut everything out, the tension comes about. It is the same thing. The blocking out is tension and vice versa. We make ourselves smaller in this process. We become less agile, less flexible, less poised where we're sitting or standing. It's a limitation on the body, and we go into something that we've been training since we were little, this concentration thing, where we exclude everything for the focus on one singular thing, the veranda, the text I'm reading for the instance, and 2 lines above, 2 lines under, or something I think about. The idea that if I'm thinking about planning, I should exclude everything else. I shouldn't be present here in space, neither in time, and I should be doing the planning or whatever I think in a very, very exclusive and shut off now, where nothing can enter. A sort of very, very defined limitation. A limitation that is definition by itself. In this process, we become much less able to take in reality. By this shutting out process, everything disappears around us, and the little light we had from the beginning becomes dimmer and dimmer. By not letting the surroundings, every object come into play, we cannot have the specific either. The one is excluding the other. Invite the space around you, embrace it, let it be part of you. You do not disappear if you take in the space, and your focus does not disappear. Actually, just the contrary. What will happen is you sharpening both your ability to take in your surroundings. When you will, then you will also get a sharpening of the little detail focus. Goes hand in hand. Fractality shows that the outer reality is always in concord with the inner. Both consciousness, our thinking, and the surrounding are fractal. And that means you have to engage them all to have reality, so to speak. They go into each other, the outer side and the inner side, just like the interpenetrative aspect of space itself. It is always interpenetrative. It penetrates in each layer, and by having this difference between the surrounding world and your inner world, you block it out, and you be less capable of participating in reality, being with reality, going in the same rhythm, reading off the rhythm of reality. Once you take in space, you will immediately notice that there is less tensioning of the body, it gets less tired. This is an invitation to space. This is an invitation to more room in the head, to allow for both the contradictions, the one and the many, the specific and the unspecific, the greater whole and the very, very small detail. There is not an accident that most surgeons, or I would say all good surgeons, are keenly aware of whatever is happening around them. Not because they need to. In our normal logic, the only area of focus should be the operating table, or even some smaller part of the patient's body, maybe the thing that's sticking out from the weave, maybe it's appendix that needs to be removed. But the doctor, to have that focus, need to take all in, all his surroundings, and they are all doing that, because otherwise they would not be able to perform anything. So this is this division we make between what is important and what is not important. And this is the cause of this strain, this blockage that effectively hinders us in focusing and being aware. It's the very same thing. By creating a difference, we block out awareness. By creating specific subjects, we make the subjects even smaller. So there is a dual take here. First, we define the world. That means that we introduce a blockage in the world, which is the very same that happens in your mental side, your subjective take of the whole thing. While you're doing this blockage, the world becomes more defined, even more sharp and crowded with all the objects, and in the end you can no longer access the future because you made your whole reality too crowded to do pretension. That would be very hard to construct. And you see how the different disabilities that we get from this distinction, or this sharpening of reality that we think we're doing, which is actually blocking out of reality. In the fractal world, which this world really is, nothing is separatable like that. And enforcing these random separations, they are just that, random. That would go the same for the surgeon if he says the operating space is the only important space, the rest of the patients not, operating table not, the ceiling not important. Think now all these things are interacting with the place the operation should take place. Localization is something that comes from the metaphysics of presence. Localizations like that is what causing us to block out things. By having the idea of complete closure and radical otherness, in that way that there's no connection at all, rejecting the interpenetrative matrushka in a very fearsome and hard way, will make for a hardening of all the distance and borders, limits, and you fractionize reality, and then you say with this fractionized reality that you can only take in a part in your thinking, in your being, in your now. Many skilled surgeons are very good at squash as well. It seems to be very endemic among the surgeons. And squash always takes 100 or 360 perception and a very acute inner perception at the same time. Those two are very important. He needs to know where he's localized in the real world, in the fractional world. In the world of the fractals, it means that you have to have an inner attention, an inner awareness. That's the main foundation for localization in the world of fractals. Go into yourself and then you can become localized. Trying to, with not knowing, shutting things out, making this not knowing artificial borders in different places that are completely random, haphazardous, made by chance, without any thinking, any intention. You will, as you live your life, using things that don't have any intention, you will block out intention, direction as well. Since you get used to thinking reality is happenstance, is by chance. This is this causality I mentioned before. That's the chance. And seeing the world as a series of chance-like features is being passive. It's the same as looking on the world. When you're not engaging in the world, it will look much more hazardous, random. Whereas it is the randomness that you put in yourself that gets self-reflected. And this is the circular reasoning that begins with the randomness, and randomness because of this first step into randomness, because will become the most identifiable trait of this constructed reality. It's chance-like, because you made yourself a passive receiver of the chance-like structure outside yourself. I will not mention time in this lecture, but this is very similar to linear time. It's a chance-like way of things to progress without any connections between each movement. They just push one another like domino tiles. So it's all happened by itself, and you declare yourself to be innocent of anything, not part of the world, only a bystander, not participating with your thinking, your intention, and thereby with your doing. And the future will, in this case, just happen by itself. It will no longer be part of your control. A future without control will be the same as the absence that you want to cut out to have the only living thing that's left. That is the now, the only thing that seems partly lifelike. And the same process, simultaneously, you also cut out the past, because you don't need any knowledge to inform your decisions. You are no longer making decisions. They come by themselves. It's not even you that start the carousel of falling domino tiles or thoughts. It does itself. Let them roll for a while. Don't you construct any thoughts by yourself, by your intention, by your wantingness, by your desire. Let instead the domino tiles of thoughts happen by themselves, and then you got rumination, like a cow eating the same thing over and over and over again. Same objects reappearing over and over and over again. And because the objects are defined, dense, superficial, there's no depth, because there's no depth in yourself. You don't see your own thinking anymore. It's blocked out. Also, the depth of the world around you will be blocked out. You will see literally and perceive only surfaces. Music will become shallow, just a rhythm, something repeatable, whereas the nuances disappear. Comes out of vision, not part of presencing anymore, and you get this crude thing. Sounding maybe like some sort of elevator music, somewhere far, far away. Fractality shows that the more objects you take in, the more you let different qualities, properties shine, the more you can take in after that. You are making your consciousness bigger, not smaller. More fractality you take in, the more you can both interact with space, have more properties, more knowledge, but you can also start going with the rhythm of time, going into time, being with time, doing the same rhythm. And this is the nowness of Husserl and Bergson, the active nowness. Now consciousness becomes broader, wider, and also multi-leveler, becomes striated, like this, going up, becomes bigger, more directed. It can enforce its power on thinking and the world gives back. It says, yes, I welcome intention to the world, because the world is intention. So this is what blocks out intention and consciousness. The idea of mutual exclusiveness between many things, and the idea you can't do several things at the same time. Each slot in the linear time, each now only sort of allows very little, maybe only one thing at a time. And it becomes smaller and smaller, and you get not only crowdedness, you also get the stress, because the sequencing seems to be happening by itself, out of your control, out of your intimacy with time and space. This is of course also the establishment of the ontic view of existence, rather than how existence bring into action, how existence come about. The why question gets reduced or replaced by a what question. What is existence? What is a thought? Where does it end? Where does it begin? What is an object? It's defined, all these things are defined by what it's not. And everything becomes more and more shallow, surfaced, lesser. It's like saying an egg doesn't have an inside. The only thing I can see is the outside. And I make a negative space around the egg, very fitting metaphor this in this Easter time, coming soon. And you make the egg without any inside, no yolk, no white. And I would say this is how most people perceive the world today. Just surfaces, demanding their attention. You give the attention automatically, without control, and you let your objects you self-created make your thoughts, or cause your thoughts, just like Descartes. And then you identify yourself with the thoughts. You say, those are the thinking I did. That's me. And in this case, blockage come to block out a higher being, a higher I, which goes hand in hand, having no depth of reality. And this reality becomes blander, more black and white, more boring, more predictable from the perspective of the I, because you project your own thinking, your own doing automatically. And in the end you say, this automatic property of reality, this proves its reality. Reality is proven to be real just because it has the property of happenstance, randomness. That becomes a seal, a stamp of reality. Everything is happenstance. That becomes your mantra, which you incessantly repeat for yourself to prove to yourself this is the real world. And it's this world you try to get more and more into, to find where is the lack coming from. You need to sharpen your eyes even harder to see the distances, the eggs, and the world becomes more and more surface, less and less tangible. Depth disappears both on the subject side, you become two-dimensional, and the things become two-dimensional around you, without a choice, without any dimension to them. And I think this is just about enough for now and for space. Next time I will, in 887, do something more about fractal time, because it's so interesting and opening up. It is very good in that way. I say thank you very much, and I wish you a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye. This is a bit funny. I used to have a game called Go, and I called it Go-spel on my computer. And somebody kept looking for that game on my computer for a whole week, I think. Didn't see what was in front of him because it looked like gospel. Maybe he thought it was a music file, but it was the game of Go. Well, I'd go now and say bye bye.